So what's up guys, my name's Ash and welcome back to a brand new video. In today's video guys, we've got some custom tactics and player instructions, one of the best balanced formations in FIFA 23, this being the 4-2-3-1. But just before we get started guys, as always, I'd very much appreciate it if you could drop this a thumbs up as it does help me out greatly. It's team of the season, so if you guys need any coins, make sure you check out MMOXP.com. Their link is down in the description. They're fast, cheap and reliable, and if you use my code Rema, you can get yourself a nice 5% discount. Alright then guys, so starting off with the custom tactics, for the defensive style, I like to have this on balance. This is because it gives you the best control over your defense, where when you want to press, you are able to press, and then when you want to drop off, be a little bit more passive maybe, you're also able to do that. The other settings are a little bit one-dimensional, and you're not really able to do that and have as good control as balanced. Now moving on to the defensive width, at the moment I'm using 35. The reason I've lowered this in like recent weeks is because I noticed when I had it at like 45, there was just too many gaps in my defensive line, so lowering this to like 35 has really helped close those gaps as such. It makes it a lot more difficult for an opponent to just run through. This does come at a cost. We don't have as great a coverage of the wings, but I'm honestly okay with that. I think it's definitely a necessary sacrifice. That being said, if you want to up the width, that is completely fine as well. Now moving on to the depth guys, I'm currently using this on 60. This is because it gives us a nice balanced defensive line where it's neither too deep and it's not too high either. If it's too deep, we're constantly getting pinned back. We don't really want that, and if it's too high, then we're just going to get through balled all the time, and that's not going to be fun. So I kind of just like going for a balance where sometimes I can be a little bit deeper, other times I can press a little bit higher. Now moving on to build up play guys, this is kind of a preference thing, but at the moment I'm really enjoying fast build up. This is because it really suits my style of play at the moment, and I'm really enjoying my players' movements. It's super quick, super fast and super enjoyable to play with. I've honestly been scoring some really nice goals with this. If you feel more comfortable with something like balance though, which I would say is probably the most meta option to use, then that is also fine, but fast build up's been great for me. Now moving on to chance creation guys, I suggest using direct passing. This is an absolute must in my eyes. The reason for this is direct passing is like the most meta, so your attacking players will like bunch up against the defenders, so you can do like the really overpowered 1v1 isolation plays, and players also make the extra movements in the box so you can get off that extra pass. This really isn't possible with the other settings. Now moving on to the attacking width, I like to have this on about 47. It's not really a specific number, but the reason I've gone for this is because I don't want my width to be too narrow to the point where it feels like my players are sat on top of each other, and I don't want the width too high either, otherwise it becomes way too wide. And if I wanted to use a wide variation of this formation, I would just use the wide variation, so I just like to go for a bit of a balance there. Now moving on to players in box, I have this on 6. This is so I can get some players into the box to create those chances, but we don't overcommit the entire team to the point where we get counter-attacked. And as for corners and free kicks, I have these both on 1 because there is a set piece routine that I use which requires these to be on 1. There is a link to that in the top right hand corner of the screen. Now moving on to the players you want to use guys in the striker position, because this is a one striker formation, I suggest going for a nice well-rounded striker. This is somebody that can do a bit of everything, because you have to compensate for the fact that there's one striker instead of 2 in this formation. So where you could get the balance in a two-striker formation between the two strikers, by having like one creative player and then a more finisher player next to him, you have to get that all in one player in this formation. So I suggest going for somebody that can like shoot on either foot, somebody with decent dribbling ability, good pace, good passing even, as you get the most out of the player in this position. If you used like a Haaland for example in this formation, it makes it too one-dimensional and you might struggle a lot in the attack. Now moving on to the left cam and the right cam, I suggest using really good winger style players. These are players that obviously have really good pace, good dribbling, good crossing and shooting and passing of course. It's really important to use players that are good on the wings in these positions in my opinion, because if you use like 3 actual cams, you might struggle a lot because they just don't have the pace and the agility and things like that. So you want to use actual wingers, as I feel like it's just going to make your attack so much better. But yeah, moving on to the central cam, I suggest using a nice creative player. I suggest using somebody that you are comfortable with, but I must say it's important to have somebody that is actually creative, because if you use like a striker here, for example, you're not going to get the correct creative ability that you expect from a playmaker. So it is important that you use a competent cam, otherwise you might struggle. Now moving on to the left CDM, I like to go for a more defensive minded player. This is somebody that's going to stay back and break up the play and make the defense as good as possible. So you're going to want somebody with a medium high work rate if you can get it, as you get the maximum contribution in defense and they're not too bothered about going forward. Moving on to the right CDM, I like to go for a more box to box style player. This is somebody that's going to attack and defend and have a bit of a free roll. This kind of like balances out the midfield where we have like a defensive CDM and then a more attacking minded one. It just works really well. So you're going to want somebody with a high work rate if you can get it, as you get the maximum contribution in attack and defense, but just ensure that this player has a nice well-rounded card. Now moving on to the fullbacks, I like to go for a balance between the two. I have Roberto Carlos, who is my more attacking minded fullback in the left back position. This is somebody that's actually going to contribute going forward on our attack, and then in the right back position I've got a more defensively sound player that is not going to go forward. So I just have that balance between the two. You guys don't have to do that if you don't want. As for the centre backs, these need to be full meta. These need to be fast players with a medium high work rate, really good animations, and a good physicality. It's super important that you use good defenders in this game, otherwise you're just going to concede a lot of goals. As for the goalkeeper, it really doesn't matter, use whoever you want. Now moving on to the player instructions, guys. On the striker, I like to have him on stay central and mixed attack. The reason we have him on stay central is because it's important that he does stay in the central areas. We don't want him drifting out wide, as he's never going to be where we need him to be, especially since we only have one striker, so we need him to stay central so he's always there when we need him. And then we also have him on mixed attack, as I feel like it's a lot better for the build up. You just get a lot more out of the striker. If you put him on getting behind, they're always going to make the same one-dimensional runs and they're not going to do too much. In the 4-2-3-1, I think especially having him on mixed attack is super important, as that extra player in the build up and players alternating their positions, it just works really well. Mixed attack just makes the striker a lot more involved, in my opinion. Now moving on to the left cam and the right cam, we have them on get into the box for cross. We have them on get into the box for cross because they can be super hesitant when they're on balanced crossing runs. So we want them on get into the box for cross so you get the best movement out of these players, and they do actually commit into the penalty area to help you finish off those chances. Now moving on to the central cam, I just have him on get into the box for cross as well. It's for the same reason as the wide players. We don't want him to be hesitant. Some people might prefer to have him on balanced crossing runs, so sometimes he could hang out on the edge of the box, for example, for like a rebound, but I just prefer to get him in there as I feel like I get the most out of him that way. Now moving on to the left CDM, the more defensive minded player, we have him on stay back while attacking, cut passing lanes and cover centre. We have him on stay back so he doesn't think about going forward, especially since he's a defensive player. It's pretty self-explanatory. We'll have him staying back. We have him on cut passing lanes, so he's always looking to break up the play and annoy our opponents. It's a super good setting, this one, and I always suggest it in most of my videos. And we also have him on cover centre, so he does cover the central areas when he is defending. Now moving on to the right CDM, where we've got a more box to box style player, we have him on the default settings and cover center. We have him on the default settings because we want him to have a bit of a free roll, so we don't really want to restrict him all that much, so we kind of just let him do his own thing. The only important thing is that we have him on cover center, so he does defend these central areas. Now moving on to the left back, my more attacking minded fullback, we have him on balanced attack and overlap. The reason we have him on balanced attack and overlap is because the 4-2-3-1, although it's one of like the wider narrow formations, it's still a narrow formation, and sometimes we just need that wider option to help us out to retain possession, especially if our opponent is pressing. It's also super good for attacks because sometimes they just don't expect that wide pass, and it's just super nice to have this option. So balanced attack and overlap on your more attacking minded fullback. And then for the right back, my more defensive fullback, I have him on stay back and overlap. We have him on stay back, so we always have at least 3 defenders back, and we have him on the overlap run type for the same reason as the left back, where if we do send him on a run forward, he's going to add width by making overlapping runs. As for the centre backs and the goalkeeper, I have them on the default settings and I do not touch them. But yeah guys, they're my custom tactics and player instructions for the 4-2-3-1. If you have enjoyed or found this useful, please be sure to drop this a thumbs up, sub to the channel if you are new, and don't forget to turn on notifications. And with all that aside guys, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Peace.